let's get started. So I know, Lisa, you're limited on time tonight. So first and foremost, I really want to thank you for joining us, coming to the Bronx via Zoom, and during your incredibly busy schedule. So I know you're in production on a new film now. So what I want to ask you is just a few questions and just like find out about the film. So first and foremost, what's the origin story of this film that you co-directed with Liz Garbus? And how did it begin, and how did you come to work with Stacey Abrams?
Wow, that is a great question. I think oftentimes as an artist and an activist, I haven't always been able to work on projects that so intimately allows me to be seated in both spaces as a part of like my intentionality of working on a project. And so the origin of All In the Fight for Democracy is two words, one fabulous person, and that's Stacey Abrams. Following the 2018 run here in Georgia, a lot of people approached her saying they wanted to tell that story. And Stacey wisely saw that it was a bigger story, that it was important to share this history of voter suppression. And so she met with several filmmakers, decided on the team at Story Syndicate, and they invited me to join in telling this history and unpacking it in a way that people could see how the past had an impact on the present. You know, how the past is prologue to this moment that we find ourselves in. And that is kind of, basically it was the summer of 2019 when all of this began.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I think my internet, it's so funny. I'm like, my internet never goes out, but it decides to go out right now. The love of Zoom. All right. So also, what was your first conversation with Stacey like?
I had a meeting with her because she wanted to get a sense of my perspective as a storyteller for this history. And I'll always remember because she was so generous. She was able to unpack the story in a way that I immediately called Liz and I was like, oh my gosh, I hope, I'm so excited to be on this project and for us to be working with Stacey, who was a producer on the film, because she just really helped us to visualize what we call a monster movie, this history. When we look at the inception of our country, Native Americans, enslaved African peoples, women, we can't vote. It's 6% of our country that can vote. And so progress is slow, and it slowly happens. And, you've got the 15th Amendment and, African American men can vote. And then the promise of Reconstruction with senators and governors, of African descent. But then there's the pushback and the retrenchment with Jim Crow and the Black codes and the violence and intimidation with the rise of the Klan. And then, women with the 19th Amendment, but not Black women. We're not still included in the franchise. Then, we get to 1965, and I'm fast forwarding through history, but there's certainly much work that's happening. but these are the milestones. And, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is so important. It's expanding the franchise for everyone. But then in 2013, Shelby County v. Holder guts all that progress. So, it's like there's this push and pull. There's this framing about this conversation that it was so illuminating to speak with Stacey Abrams about the architecture of voter suppression. Liz and I liken it to a monster movie. You think you're making progress, you've cut the head off, and then the Hydra shows up and it's sprouted 2 more heads. And then you got to cut the head off again, fighting that good fight. And so I think what was great about talking with Stacey is that she made the history very tangible in ways that helped us to translate into the film.
Definitely. I mean, the film is so expansive. So how did you create the structure with Liz?
I think, there was an early interview with Stacey and I believe Carol Anderson, and Carol actually mentions this in the film, and she said, you can't understand Georgia 2018 and voter suppression without understanding the history. And so one of the first things that our team did was to create a timeline, from We the People and, the inception of our country, and then to create timelines for the major milestones, what happens and doesn't happen, and then to think of who were the right candidates to interview, who were, representative of these moments, whether they were journalists or historians or people who actually bore witness to the history, like an Andrew Young.
Yeah. In so much of the film, like you weave it all together with the archival footage, which was incredible. And so you use this archival footage to set the stage for contemporary voter suppression. So why was it so important for you to put together these documents, these movements, and these protests?
I think to really bring to life, particularly with individual stories and testimonies, so that it's not just the 50,000 foot view, but it's also the 5 foot, the Andrew Young telling you as a witness to this history of what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during Bloody Sunday. It personalizes and creates an empathy and an access to the history as opposed to a historian who wasn't there. The same with, the verite, with Desmond Meade in Florida, because we wanted to show that, yes, we can share this beautiful archival images, well, actually not beautiful, of, what happened at the end of the 19th century and how the vagrancy laws imprisoned African Americans, took away the vote, starting in Florida, and it's still happening now. And so this combination of archival and verite for certain stories was a way of making the history come alive.
It's incredible. I'm sure the editing room was daunting.
Well, we had 2 edit rooms going. We had incredible editors, 2 wonderful women, Nancy Novak and Crystalline Armendariz, and I think, a keen sense of what were the important beats that we needed to capture, but also we also expanded and contracted with the edit because we wanted to move and keep people on the edge of their seats with a history that I think some people thought they knew, but presented in a way that there are some thriller moments. There are these pivots that hopefully we presented in a way that was provocative and unexpected.
Definitely. I mean, I when I was watching it, I had moments where I was like, "Wow, wow," like literally saying that. So, I think you
Oh, tell me a
definitely.
wow. I want to hear about a wow for you. What was a wow moment?
Um, I think just going through all the amendments was incredible, and then like after Reconstruction and that transition to Jim Crow, to me was a huge wow. And then just like all the footage that had just like listing like all the different politicians that were there that were of like black ancestry, and the fact that you saw them, you're like, oh, that person and that person and that person, and then the transition of like almost a sort of terrorism was the wow to me.
Yes, how targeted and swift it is I think is always something that stands out when you look at the progress that's made, but then the pushback that happens.
Definitely. So I have a question. What is it like knowing that you needed to release the film by the time of this election? And how did you finish it during a pandemic?
We went into it knowing that we were not going to have the typical amount of time that we would have loved to dedicate to making the film. It was done in a concise timeline, but we also knew that we had to deliver by a certain time um, in order for the film to be out now and to share this history and be part of a conversation. Um, and so, that's why there's two directors, because we divided and conquered. We worked on different sections and we come back in and put it together. And luckily, we finished our interviews the very first week in March, and the office closed like the week after. We quickly pivoted uh, to virtual workstations, and I so much credit goes to the head of post production. Ad Story Syndicate, who really found quick, artful ways for us to be in communication and sharing cuts. Um, and, we had to color correct on color calibrated iPads because we could not be together. We mixed from afar with special headphones. Um, and I think, it's funny, story wise, there was a moment we were like, okay, we're going to get Georgia's primary, Wisconsin, what it means to vote during COVID. Um, and almost, it's a never ending story,
Mhm.
but it's also an evergreen story. The history is what it is. And so we felt comfortable, ending when we did because yes, we don't have the postal story in there, but um, I think the historical beats and the thesis remains the same.
Definitely. Wow. Um, so this is a question that I had just in terms of thinking about like the knowledge of voter suppression. Was there any new knowledge that you gained about suppression while you were making the film? Something that maybe you didn't know?
Um, it's a great question. There, well, we didn't know about when Stacey Abrams goes to vote and also when Brian Kemp goes to vote, that they both had issues. The discovery of that footage was definitely revelatory. And a big part of why we tell those stories is that oftentimes when someone goes to vote and they've been purged and they're told that they can't, they individuals think that it's just them, that they made a mistake, not realizing that, there is this targeted weaponization. Um, uh, and so to share that, you could be these high ranking officials running for this office and you're going to have problems. Most people don't have a camera crew with them and don't know what their recourse is, but that was a big part of telling that story. I think the other story that was really interesting was Arizona in the 60s. Rehnquist being a part of Operation Eagle Eye, which went around to Black and Latinx communities, asking people to read the Constitution. If folks couldn't do it satisfactorily, they, questioned brought to task the ability of these folks to vote. And Rehnquist's relationship with Chief Justice Roberts, it shows you that the seeds that led us to the Voting Rights Act being gutted in 2013 and the subsequent fallout and initiation of very strict voter ID laws, started years before.
Yeah, it's I guess like given that that recent history too, it seems like this depiction of like these past events and histories and the recent history that you're talking about, that this film does have an educational component. So when you're thinking about this, like who is the audience that you're addressing and what would you like them to get out of the film? And then I have a second part to this question. So are there any particular communities that you would like to watch this film? Because I know you have this like amazing impact campaign as well. So I would love to hear a little bit about just that community connection and what you're doing with the campaign.
I especially in terms of audience, would love for this film to be seen by those people who don't want to engage, who don't think that their vote matters. I would like those folks, like when when we were in Arizona with Alexis from Lucha, and the guy says like, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to vote. Well, it might sound trite, but if your vote didn't matter, why are so many people trying so hard to stop you from doing it? I'd love for the people who marched in the streets this summer and are still marching, who want to see police reform, better health care, education. We want to see these changes in our community. We have to march in the streets, and we also have to march at the ballot boxes. And hopefully when you see this film, you can understand the power of your vote. Right now, like 50% of people are eligible typically are voting, but think what America can look like if 60, 70% of the folks who look like us are voting, because we are the new majority minority. And so why our engagement has a direct effect on our communities and the change that we obviously are so passionate about wanting.
Yeah, that's a great point. The intersection of just protest and the vote. That's super interesting. I guess like another question that I had is regarding like just this personal history. And I thought this was such an incredible part of the film is that this personal history of voter suppression, it seems to be like intergenerational, especially for communities that have been historically disenfranchised in the US. So in this film, like I know Stacey, she shares so many like really eloquent personal stories of her own family members. So I was wondering if you had a personal connection to these types of stories as well.
Uh, when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5, my mom told me one day we were going to, well, we got all dressed up, and I was like, wait, it's not a Sunday. We're not going to church. And she's like, we're going to go vote. And my mom like brought me into the booth. She told me about the work that she and my grandparents, both here and in Colombia, had done to fight for this right. Um, she took my hand and we pulled the lever together. Uh, I'll never forget that. She made it a most sacred act, which it will always be for me. Uh, and it made me believe in, the demo in democracy is the people. And, as someone in our film says, I think it was Michael Waldman, he's like, it's not the courts who are going to save us, it's the people. We have to show up, and we're showing up in so many ways. We're showing up in these really long lines all over the country. Here in New York, today's the first day of early voting. The lines and people were really long. And some, people are talking about waiting 2-3 hours, but people did it regardless. And that gives me great hope.
Thank you. I guess we'll just conclude with just asking you a little bit about, just what has been your trajectory of creating stories and your career path? Because I know you have this vast career that's very multifaceted. If you could just tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Before I answer that question, you asked me about the social impact
Oh
campaign.
yes, yes, yes,
Oh,
yes, definitely. We
sorry.
forgot that.
I forgot about that. So when we started the film, the entire team was, made a commitment to the creation of a social impact campaign. We have an incredibly dynamic website called allinforvoting.com. Anyone who is unclear about whether they're registered or how to become further engaged as a poll worker, or if you're an educator, we offer a Grow a Voter curriculum with history and civics lessons that are downloadable. There's information on how to host a watch party. We have a voter action hub. And we also had a bus tour because it was important for us with this film to meet people where they are. And so working with Amazon Studios, the tour went to many states, not only screening the film, but also registering people. We've given grants to a lot of community organization with boots on the ground, and micro grants to visual artists, all part of, contributing to the conversation, to the call to action, to the desire that so many people have for greater engagement. So that's at allinforvoting.com. My career trajectory from the music industry to producing narrative films to directing documentaries, there's a connective tissue. and it's about voice. It's about the voice of what are what some people call marginalized folks, but who are my folks, whose stories I treasure, who I know that these voices and stories are universal in their reach. And so whether it was in my early days working in hip hop or with a narrative film like Precious or All In, I am interested in elevating our stories, our history, um, and I think in many ways providing uh, an alternate framing of who we are that the mainstream media doesn't always showcase.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's truly an inspiration for women makers, just given that this is the woman film series. Thank you. That's such a beautiful way to, look at your trajectory and your career. Is there anything else, just, before we close, of like what's next for you, or in terms of just your career, or anything that you're working on?
Next for me is I'm going to be a poll worker. I am talking to many organizations across the country, helping them use the film as a tool of engagement. um, you know hope November 3rd will bring a change that I am seeking. um, and then I'm directing another documentary about a very important historical institution. So can't stop, won't stop. I'm down for the good fight, and I'm down for good trouble.
Wow. Thank you, Lisa. So I just want to say, like, give a huge thanks just from the Bronx and from the Bronx Documentary Center. I think your presence is so relevant and so beautiful to have us in our community. So I just want to thank you. Do you have any last words before we close?
Thank you so much for all of the preparation that you and John put into this, your passion and support for this very important art form. What I love about documentaries, and we're telling a truth. This film is fact based. There's some people who I don't think recognize the importance of documentaries in a time when there's so much disinformation, and the critical role that we play in providing not only the educational background, but a fact-based examination of issues. So I am so excited by the work that you all do, and the opportunity to share about All In this evening. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And we look forward to